So hello everybody. This is Neurodiverse Museum in conversation with, and today we're in conversation with Iris Sirendi. Hi Iris.
Hi.
So I'm really excited to be talking with you this morning because we've been working together for a while, haven't we? And it's just really exciting to hear more about what you're doing and the research that you've been working on over the last couple of years, and to be able to share that with as many people as possible so they can know what you've been doing and how that helps and impacts on their work. So, really, just to start off with, I thought it'd be good to kind of just let you introduce yourself, and yeah, a really kind of quick intro in the kind of things you've been doing.
Hi, I'm Iris, and I suppose, I don't know if I can call myself a curator because I'm not curating anything at the moment, but my background is I started as a curator of disability history through a curatorial program called Curating for Change that was delivered by an arts organisation called Accentuate, and that's how I met Justine. We were matched together through mentorship for it, and she was fantastic. And yeah, I worked there. I curated lots of different outputs related to disability history, gallery trails, and things like that. And then I went on to work and research for the Neurodiverse Museum last year after I'd finished my work with Curating for Change. And when I was researching for the Neurodiverse Museum and I was funded by the Arts Council to do it, I looked at all sorts of different things. So I looked at neurodivergent experiences in the workplace, in the heritage workplace. And then I also traveled around to different museums around England, and I spoke to a lot of different people who were in charge of working with provision for neurodivergent people, so I could get like a real sort of first-hand look into what museums are actually doing and ask the professionals some questions about their practice. And then out of that, we made some case studies with different museums. So I think I ended up doing one with Wordsworth Grasmere, one with Wakefield Museums, one with the Postal Museum, and that was a lot of fun, and I really enjoyed that. And I also interviewed a few different professionals in the questionnaire about their experiences as neurodivergent people in the museum workforce and what they'd want to change. And at the moment, I'm in the process of writing up a very lengthy report because those were some long conversations. And in the midst of all of that, in September last year, I started doing my PhD, where I'm researching. Essentially, I'm looking at creating ethical and inclusive guidance on how to tell disability histories alongside disabled people in museums. So, kind of like taking the work that things like Curating for Change and different curatorial programs for disabled people have already done, and sort of expanding it a little bit so that we can find out why specifically museums are struggling so much to tell deaf, disabled, neurodivergent, mental health related stories, and then sort of working backwards from that, like getting the data on why aren't they doing it, what are they struggling with, and then working backwards to then bring in communities and sort of almost like teach museums the best, most informed, most ethical, inclusive, trauma-informed, nice ways to do it. That all sounds very ambitious at the moment, but I am just at the the start of it. But yeah, that's me.
Oh, I mean, it's amazing, and it's been brilliant watching like your journey in developing your own understanding and expertise, and coming from that kind of lived experience as well. And I was going to ask you, what when you first started working with the sector, obviously you're kind of at this moment in time really starting to get to grips with why things aren't working. What did you feel were the real issues? And do you feel that they still are fairly similar now, or do you feel like the sector is starting to develop?
I think one of the biggest issues, I think it all stems down to just a genuine lack of understanding of deafness, disability, and neurodivergence. So if we're talking about neurodivergence more specifically for this meeting, I think because everything does lead back to just people really not understanding and having these preconceived biases that they're not deconstructing. And I think the real issue is, yeah, there needs to be more neurodivergent-led training by people with lived experience, so for organizations, so that they can understand why do we need to tell neurodivergent stories? Why do we need to have neurodivergent teams? Why do we need to have inclusive working practices and recruitment practices, because without that without that general like awareness training, people just carry on, like the status quo continues to get pushed of like, well, we're doing everything that we can. And yeah, to an extent things have improved. There have been more quiet hours and sensory bags, and sensory maps are becoming a really, really popular thing, and that's really nice to see and stuff like that. And they're doing a lot of things on the audiences and provision front, maybe because that's the most external facing. Um, but I think internally for the staff and the teams and the neurodivergent people working with collections and audiences and within the day-to-day of museums, any kind of operation from finance to events to volunteers to anybody, they're still not getting the experience that they deserve. I've been on different staff forums and stuff through my time working in the sector where neurodivergent people have expressed the same sort of concerns to me, that they just feel like their peers don't fully understand them. And yeah, I think that was the first issue that I really encountered, was kind of like people didn't really know what neurodivergence was, they didn't know how to interpret it, they didn't know. Obviously I'm talking from like a collections perspective, but then when I got involved with like staff groups and stuff like that, it was really like, it really felt like that was the wider issue. And then when I started doing the research at the Neurodiverse Museum, it was very much like, yeah, I feel like quite a lot of the responses that I had from the questionnaire and the interviews was like, there needs to be better awareness and there needs to be more training. So it all kind of melted wonderfully together.
I mean, you said so many things there that are kind of exactly why we set up the Neurodiverse Museum, aren't they? And those kind of three pillars there, the fact that it's about audience access, yes, but it's also about where are neurodivergent people within collections and display, and what about the workforce? And you need all of those. And sometimes when you're saying about that kind of understanding and that general basis of understanding of neurodivergent, I mean, that's replicated in society, isn't it? That kind of stereotype of what it is to be autistic, ADHD, dyslexic is, that stereotype of neurodivergence exists from an early age. We see it in education and we see it come through then out into society. And it's how do we stop museums being tokenistic and going, well, we've done a quiet hour and we've done a backpack. There we go. And I was talking to somebody the other day about that, that's it's not what we mean by being equitable. I think your research is starting to show that, isn't it? That as neurodivergent people, we're seeing it, and yet it's still not being reflected back out in the sector. Yeah, it was kind of a thought, but yeah. So I don't know if you had any more to say on that, and how we address that. And I guess your research is still quite early at the moment in the PhD, and how we address that. But training, yeah.
I think the main thing is obviously to have training be delivered by people with lived experience. I think that's really one of the only ways that we're going to deconstruct the stigma around neurodivergence, by having. So when we did Curating for Change, for example, we had lots of lived experience informed disability awareness training and things like that. And even being like a disabled and neurodivergent person, there's still so much to unlearn about yourself, because obviously you only
Mm.
have your own lived experience. And I'm not embarrassed to admit that, I probably have my own preconceptions challenged through the delivery of lived experience informed training. There were things that I didn't understand about other people's lived experiences, because I mean, everybody
Yeah.
grows up with this media that teaches them this about disability, and I haven't been disabled my whole life. I became disabled in my late teens. I mean, I've been neurodivergent my whole life, but I became disabled when I was 18, 19. So there was a lot of like unlearning that I had to do, and it's still a consistent process. And I think, yeah, I think that's really, really the only way that it's really going to work. I think people need to be they just need to be told.
And I guess it's like you're saying as well, it's that you're almost kind of confronting people's perceived understanding of what it is to be neurodivergent consistently, because it is the biggest thing we see when we're delivering training or when we're talking to people. you know, I'll often get people say, oh, I didn't realize that that's what neurodivergent meant, or I didn't realize that this is what happens, or it's been brilliant just talking to somebody who's telling it from that perspective, you know, what it is to mask, or what it is to feel, you know, really difficult in particular circumstances, and situationally non-speaking, or selective mute as they call it. And yeah, you probably wouldn't believe that now, but I am still, you know, it's still a, you know, before we started this session, you know, it was kicking in because I knew I'd got to talk and I'd got to be able to do that. And it's, you know, there are certain instances where that's fine and I can do it, but it's very difficult. And because people aren't actually seeing it, I think, in terms of neurodivergence, sometimes they're not believing that those kind of things are happening for us, or that that exists. And with late diagnosis, you know, so many women aren't diagnosed either. There's there's a really there's a really strange perception. I see it in society generally, but I definitely see it within museums, and how we then use that in terms of what we're saying. Oh, well, we're already equitable, we're already delivering for neurodivergent people. And I think, you know, opening at 8 o'clock with a quiet hour isn't equitable. That's not what we're talking about. It's just further exclusionary practice. Um, yeah. So I'm totally with you on all of that. Um, and then in terms of that, I mean, it's just brilliant listening to you, you know, explain why people should be thinking more about this. So I think you're probably covering some of the questions that I was going to ask you incredibly well. And because I'm kind of trying to think about how, if someone was listening to us and this conversation now and was thinking, so what can I do? What would your advice be in terms of how they could develop their practice?
I
Put you on the
think
spot.
um, the best thing that I've in my own experience in doing this research and in developing my own practice, because that was the name of the award, it was developing your creative practice. So that my entire aim of doing the project with the Neurodiverse Museum was to better understand the sector. I think some of the best things that you can do are, if it's within your energy levels and your availability and your time, and you can go visit some museums, see particularly local ones, and look at them, look at the museum websites and see what their kind of offer is for neurodivergent people. See how hard it is to find that information, first of all, because it can be very challenging. And sometimes it's hidden away on a tiny little link that says for autistic visitors, or sometimes it's beautiful and branded and it says neurodivergent, or sometimes it's under the special educational needs umbrella, because a lot of this kind of work, which it is brilliant that there is so much work going on for children and young adults in education with special educational needs, but sometimes all of the information for neurodivergent visitors is hidden under there, and it can be
Yeah,
hard to
you know,
find.
neurodivergent kids become neurodivergent adults, and people
Yeah,
forget.
but yeah, I think a really good way to understand an experience is to, if you can, go on museum websites and go into museums and see what museums are already doing in terms of their practice, and kind of like figure out, do you think this is working? Do you, like, one thing that I found really interesting to do as part of my research was just to see the sheer amount of museum websites where the information existed, but it was so hard to find. And I think
Wow.
for a person hoping to kind of like develop their practice, that would be a really interesting activity in terms of like, I'm on this museum's website and I can't find this information. I wonder whether on my museum's website we have this information and it's difficult to find. And then you can take that on and you can go to whoever it is on your digital team and say, hey, I found this issue with a lot of museum websites, that information for neurodivergent visitors, or maybe you don't have it yet. Maybe you find a really effective sensory map on a different museum's website and you're like, wow, actually, that would be really brilliant for our venue. Or maybe you find another resource and you want to recreate it. There's also lots of different training on how to create resources, places like kids in museums, neurodiverse museum, obviously, sending museums, like all of these places are showing you how to create these resources, sometimes in fairly cost-effective ways as well, because that's obviously a really big
Yeah.
thing for museums and funding. But yeah, looking at museum websites, going into museums and seeing neurodivergent provision and sort of having a look and thinking, would this work in our venue? Do I think that this is an effective way of delivering provision to neurodivergent people? And these are all just audience-based things. Reading case studies of museums that have worked alongside neurodivergent people. That's another big thing, terminology, understanding terminology better, doing training to understand neurodiversity terminology, because I slip up there. But yeah, where was I at? Oh yeah, looking at case studies of other museums that have worked with neurodivergent communities to deliver programs or to look at collections or co-curate or anything like that. Speaking to other museum professionals that have done this kind of work, I'm always happy to answer emails about stuff like this because it's my passion and it's my joy. I love what I do. I'm very, very lucky to love what I do so much. But yeah, those would be my suggestions. That's pretty much what I did in terms of, for a year. I just dedicated, those 21 hours a week that I was funded to visiting as many museums as I could within kind of my own energy levels and my well-being and what I'd scheduled out to do. Speaking to you guys at the Neurodiverse Museum and receiving mentoring, that was really helpful. And going on a lot of museum websites and seeing what provision already existed and reading a lot of articles and things like that. Because one thing that happens is a lot of museums and a lot of museum practitioners think they're the only ones doing it, and it can get really disheartening. But actually, if you look out there, there's more of us than you know. There are people who really care about this and they're really passionate about it. It's about linking us all up. We need to be connected.
Exactly. I mean, which is why we run the Museums and Neurodiversity Network, isn't it? Because that is so important to kind of go, well, who else is doing this? What are they doing? How do we all learn from each other? And create a momentum that means that it's not okay to ignore it anymore. This is something that everyone needs to be thinking about. And I think there's some great ideas in there because often neurodivergent people, the first thing we'll do is go to the website. What's it going to be like? What will happen when I get there? Where do I go? What happens if I get overwhelmed? All of those questions are quite easy and straightforward to answer through a website, but they're not. They're often not there. Or like you say, it's difficult for you to find that information. So I think that's brilliant advice in terms of how people can start thinking about, well, what else is happening? What else can I do? And then, like you said earlier, talking to neurodivergent people and just going and asking them, what can we do? How can that work? Is this something that would help you? Sometimes, I think that's such a straightforward thing that people can do. Often it's quite hard, or people feel uncomfortable. And the terminology, I often say to people, it's really important that you know it and it's really important that you're using it and you understand it, but I don't want people to be scared by it and to not do this kind of work. Because like you say, we get it wrong and slip up and say, it happens because your brain is working like 10 times faster behind the scenes and you're always thinking about what you're talking about when you're not speaking. So I think it's just giving people that confidence to say, it's best to just start thinking about how you can do this. And there's some quite cost-effective ways to do it. So yeah, thank you. And then my final question was going to be about you personally and how you feel the research and the work that you've done so far has helped you develop and on your career path, or have there been issues as that's happened? And yeah.
Yeah, so I'd say one of the biggest benefits of having done the research was getting to work more closely with the Neurodiverse Museum. You guys have been so fantastic. So I had mentoring from all of you at one point in time or another, and I just it's been a massive benefit just genuinely talking to sector leaders who are so like neuroaffirming and completely understand and have so much time to give to this issue, and also understand the sector and the pressures around it. And like, I don't know, I just think you're brilliant, and I think you're so like fantastically well placed to do this kind of work. I can't imagine like a better team of 3 people to do this kind of work than you and Al and Soraya. I just think you're so great. But
I set you up to say that.
no,
I didn't.
no, I think I have to say it because obviously you guys are the reason that I was able to do the work in the first place. You can completely cut that out if it feels like inauthentic or something.
I should be taking the quotes and trying to, because what I think you've seen as we've been going through the process. So for anyone watching this, Iris is part of our kind of like inner circle of WhatsApp messages. So she's frequently seeing all of the kind of conversations that are going on. And funding has been really difficult. It's been really hard for us to access it because we're neurodivergent and because we aren't maybe as shouty as other people. And we're kind of, even though we're kind of, working on a different kind of level, I guess. And it has been really challenging. And it was so grateful that the Art Fund have given us some funding to allow us to do this. But, just as you probably have benefited from working with us, what we benefit from is working with so many other different individuals. And you definitely key one of those to understand your research and understand how that delivers what we're doing and what the sector need. And the more we can have conversations like this to be able to tell people, this is what you've been doing, this is what you've learned, the better for the sector. So sorry, I interrupted again then, but yeah. So your own career development and the PhD as well, and that must feel like, okay, I'm really starting to feel like I can make a difference in what's
Yeah,
happening.
I think the fact that I was doing these two sort of branches of research at the same time was so helpful because I made all of these different museum connections throughout um, the work with the Neurodiverse Museum that I was able to sort of leverage as I'm doing my my PhD work. So at the moment, my first study is two different questionnaires. So one is for deaf, disabled, neurodivergent, mental health experienced audiences. And it's essentially just asking a couple of questions about what are your thoughts on museums? Have you ever encountered representation of lived experience of disability, deafness, neurodivergence, mental health in a museum? If you haven't, there's other questions, obviously. And it also asks, like, would you be interested in seeing more of these stories in museums? Because I want to because I want to understand kind of how these communities feel as audiences of museums. Like, are they interested in seeing more disability related stories, more neurodivergence related stories, or do they just go to museums because they want to go to museums? Like, because at the end of the day, you don't necessarily have to be interested in disability because you're a disabled person, right? But yeah, that's what I'm trying to gauge, just sort of get a better understanding of what are the barriers to seeing disability history in museums from an audience side. And then my other questionnaire, as part of this first study, is specifically for museum practitioners and volunteers. And it's asking them whether they've ever worked with a story relating to disability or neurodivergence or deafness or mental health, and whether they've ever worked with like communities related to those experiences and how they found it and what did they feel were the things that went well and what were the things that they kind of struggled with doing that work. And I'm hoping that it encourages people to be kind of as frank and honest as possible. So I've made some of the questions quite quantitative, so it's like they can tick off like, I had problems with funding, or I had problems with making my meetings accessible, or I had problems with this or that or the other. Because um I just I feel like I just really, really want to collect those authentic experiences of why people are struggling to do this work. Because if we don't understand why people are struggling to do the work, then we can't get to the root of
Yeah.
how we make them do the
Yeah.
work, right? You've got to deconstruct the problem by understanding the problem first, rather than just going in and going, okay, we're delivering this disability history exhibition today, but we haven't actually looked at why people in our museum haven't done disability history stuff in the past. We can assume
Yeah,
why, that
agree.
they don't understand, that there isn't the collections, that there isn't the time, the funding, but I want the data to back that as well.
I mean, that's brilliant. And having that data will be so important, particularly when there are some people within the sector who still potentially don't want to do this work or don't want it to happen, or don't want it to happen because they think it costs money or various other reasons. But to be able to have the data behind it of saying, well, these are the reasons why it doesn't happen and these are the reasons why it should. Oh, and it be really, really underpinned with academic research, I think it'd be so valuable. And it's brilliant to hear more about what you're doing. And we need to make sure that through the Neurodiverse Museum, we send out any of your surveys or any of the things that you're trying to get as much reach as possible. So yeah, we'll keep doing that. Send anything along to us that we can, and we'll just keep a track on what you're doing and how we can share it, and just keep coming back. So it's been really brilliant talking to you today, and yeah, I'm hoping that the rest of the sector kind of key into some of the research that you've done already, and then are learning from what you're doing going forward. So thank you so much for your time. I'm going to put up the final screen. A big thank you to our funders, the Art Fund, for supporting us and allowing us to start delivering this work again on a national scale. And yeah, keep tuned for more In Conversations.